The silence was suffocating. In the dead of night in one of Dubai's most exclusive villas, the air was thick with an unsettling calm. The kind of stillness that only comes after something terrible has happened. It was a maid, just beginning her shift, who stumbled upon it, a discovery that would haunt her forever. A young woman, barely 21, lying in a pool of her own blood. Her body twisted in unnatural angles, a lifeless contrast to the pristine luxury that surrounded her. The blood-stained sheets clung to the bed, evidence of a violent struggle. A shattered perfume bottle lay on the floor, the sweet scent of her once worn fragrance now mingling with the stench of death. The villa, usually a sanctuary of opulence and wealth, had become a tomb. The silence was deafening, broken only by the heavy footsteps of the officers as they arrived. The victim, unrecognizable at first, her passport gone, was a mystery. Her face told a story of a life cut short, but nothing more. No identification, no trace of who she was or how she ended up here. Was this a lover's quarrel gone wrong? A tragic accident? Or something far darker, hidden behind the closed doors of the city's elite? As the detectives examined the crime scene, one thing was clear. The truth would be harder to uncover than they could ever imagine. Her name was Priya Mehra, a name that once carried the promise of a brighter future. She was just 21 years old, young enough to still believe that anything was possible, old enough to understand the harsh realities of the world. Priya was from a small town in India, a place where everyone knew everyone, but opportunities were scarce. Her family didn't have much, just enough to scrape by. From a young age, Priya understood the weight of responsibility. She worked hard to help her parents support her siblings. Whether it was in the fields, in the family shop, or tutoring local children, Priya always gave more than she took. Her family was everything to her, and she dreamed of giving them a better life. She dreamed of a life beyond the confines of her village, a life where she wouldn't have to worry about bills, about food on the table, about going without. The dream that consumed her was simple: financial freedom. When the opportunity came to move to Dubai, she didn't hesitate. The city of skyscrapers, luxury, and endless possibilities. It was a place where people went to reinvent themselves, to chase fortunes. For Priya, it was her chance to escape the shadows of poverty, to stand on her own, to live the life she had only seen in magazines and movies. But leaving wasn't easy. It meant leaving behind the family she loved, the familiar faces, the comfort of home. Her mother's voice, filled with concern, echoed in her mind, urging her to be cautious. "Dubai is different, Priya. Be careful," she would say, the crack in her voice revealing the fear that every parent feels when they send their child into the unknown. But Priya was determined. She reassured her mother, her voice full of excitement, even though deep down there was a gnawing worry. "I'm going to make it, Ma," she told her. "I'll make you proud." When she arrived in Dubai, it felt like the world had opened up to her. A job as a hotel receptionist wasn't much, but it was a start. Every day she worked tirelessly, her hopes growing with each small success. She wasn't afraid of hard work, but the promise of something more, something beyond the routine, was always in her mind. Priya had a fire inside her, a fire that pushed her to be better, to achieve more, and to never settle. She was smart, she was driven. She knew the risks, but for the first time in her life she had a taste of something more than she could have ever dreamed of. She felt it in the air, possibilities. But dreams have a way of twisting into nightmares. Her story was not one of pure ambition and triumph. It was a story of desperation, manipulation, and deceit. As Priya began to step into the world she had so longed for, she found herself entangled in something darker than she could have ever imagined. At first, it all seemed like magic. Luxury dinners, shiny new clothes, promises of freedom. But underneath that allure was a world of control, where her dreams would eventually become chains. And yet, Priya stayed. Why? Because she was trapped in the very thing she had come to Dubai for, the hope of a better life, of escape, of freedom. But in her quest for freedom, she found herself caught in the web of a man who promised the world, but delivered only manipulation and danger. It's easy to look back and think she could have escaped, that she should have seen the signs. But it's not always that simple. Priya was a young woman with a heart full of ambition and a mind full of dreams. And in the end, it was those very dreams that would lead her down a path she couldn't turn back from. Priya was running out of time. The excitement of her new life in Dubai was starting to fade. The skyscrapers, the luxury, the endless possibilities, everything felt distant now, like a dream she couldn't quite hold on to. Reality had set in. She was struggling. The job at the hotel, though steady, barely paid enough to cover her rent, let alone her living expenses. Every day she worked long hours. Receptionist shifts that dragged into the early morning, her body aching from the constant motion, her eyes growing tired from the fluorescent lights overhead. She wasn't complaining, though. She had come to Dubai for this after all, the chance to make something of herself. But as the months passed, it became clear. Her hard work wasn't going to get her to where she wanted to be. There were bills she couldn't pay, moments when she had to go without, food she couldn't afford to buy. The bright lights of the city seemed to mock her from afar as she walked the same tired path every day. She was stuck in a cycle she couldn't escape on her own. At night, as she lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, Priya thought about home. Her family, the promises she'd made. She missed her mother's voice, the familiar comfort of her siblings. But there was something more than homesickness creeping in. Loneliness. She tried to stay in touch with her family, but the calls grew less frequent. She was always so busy. There was no time for catching up, no time for visits, no time to share the little moments of joy she had left. Slowly, the emotional strain began to build. She couldn't let them see how tough things were. She couldn't let them know that the dream was crumbling, bit by bit. Then came the first sign of relief, or so she thought. It was an older man who introduced himself to her one evening after work. His name was Victor Al-Fayed. He was tall, elegant, with a presence that commanded attention. The kind of man who carried himself like he was above everyone else. Priya had seen men like him in the glitzy corners of Dubai before, powerful, wealthy, untouchable. But Victor seemed different. He was kind, at least at first. He didn't just look at her like another hotel employee, he saw her, or so it seemed. He had a way with words, a charm that felt genuine. He noticed the small things about her, how she liked the quiet corners of the cafe, the way she smiled when she spoke about her family. It felt special. And he promised her things Priya hadn't dared to imagine in her small town. He promised her a life without worry, without struggle. Victor began to lavish her with gifts, expensive clothes, new shoes, even a phone upgrade. He would tell her that it was just a small token of appreciation for the work she did, for the effort she put into her job. At first, Priya hesitated. It felt too good to be true. But the promise of financial freedom tugged at her. The allure of a better life was too tempting. One night, he took her to a fancy restaurant, the kind of place Priya could never afford on her own. The soft music, the sparkling chandeliers, the decadent food, it all felt like a dream. Victor smiled at her across the table. "You're too beautiful to be working this hard," he said, his voice smooth like honey. "You deserve more than this." Priya laughed nervously, her heart fluttering. "What do you mean?" she asked, even though she knew. He leaned in closer. "I can help you," he said softly. "You don't have to struggle anymore. I can offer you a lifestyle you've only dreamed of." For the first time in months, Priya felt a glimmer of hope. Victor's world was a place of extravagance, a world she hadn't even known existed. He took her on trips to places she never imagined she'd visit: luxury resorts, five-star dinners, shopping sprees that left her breathless. Each gift, each gesture, each promise drew her deeper into his world. He was like a protector, a savior. But slowly, a shift began. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Victor began to ask more of her, though it wasn't always in the way one would expect. It started with the secrecy. "Don't tell anyone about us," he said one evening, his voice smooth, almost casual. "People wouldn't understand. It's just better if we keep this between us." Priya didn't think much of it at first. After all, she was getting what she'd always dreamed of, a life of comfort, of luxury, the kind of life she had always wanted to show her family. She believed that Victor, in his own way, was helping her. He was showing her a different path, a path that didn't involve constant struggle. But as time passed, the demands began to change. Victor told her that she needed to distance herself from her friends, from the people she'd known at the hotel. He told her they didn't understand the kind of life she was living now. "You're better than them," he'd say. "You don't need people holding you back." Priya felt a sense of unease, but it was buried beneath the thrill of the new life Victor was offering her. After all, what was a few sacrifices in exchange for the life she had always dreamed of? Then came the talk of her career. Victor began telling her that if she wanted to truly succeed in Dubai, if she wanted to rise above the ordinary, she needed to keep their relationship a secret. He said the people in her hotel wouldn't understand, that they'd judge her, that they'd think she was using him for his money. He told her that, in a city like Dubai, her reputation was everything, and that everything she'd worked for could be ruined if anyone found out about them. He made it sound reasonable. After all, he was offering her a chance to break free from the mundane. Why wouldn't she want to keep it between them? But the more he spoke, the more Priya realized she was losing something that wasn't just her freedom, but herself. Victor wasn't just offering her a luxurious life, he was starting to control it. Her ambitions, once her own, began to blend with his desires, and with each passing day, the line between what was hers and what was his grew thinner. She knew deep down that this wasn't the dream she had come to Dubai for, but she couldn't see a way out. Not now, not with everything on the line. And so, she stayed. What do you think? Was Priya's decision to trust Victor understandable, given her struggles? Or was she being manipulated from the start? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to follow the rest of her story as we uncover the shocking truth behind this dangerous relationship. The walls were closing in, and Priya didn't even realize it. At first, it was the small things. A missed call here, a delayed message there. Her mother's voice on the other end of the line, filled with concern, grew quieter as the weeks passed. Priya hadn't meant to distance herself, but something inside her began to shift. She wasn't the same girl who had stepped off the plane in Dubai with wide-eyed ambition. No, now she was someone else. Someone lost in a world she had never truly known. Victor had a way of making her feel like she was always in control. But the reality was far different. Slowly, he tightened his grip, one delicate thread at a time, until she found herself tangled in the web he had spun. Her family tried to reach her, but she avoided their calls. The conversations with her mother grew shorter, her excuses more elaborate. She'd tell her mother she was too busy, that work had become overwhelming. She told herself that they wouldn't understand. It was easier to lie than to explain what was really happening, how she was trapped in a life she hadn't signed up for. Victor, ever the protector, made it clear that her family wasn't part of this world. They didn't understand what it meant to be successful in Dubai. They couldn't understand the kind of life she was leading now, the kind of life he was offering her. So, one by one, the people she loved were pushed away, not by force, but by the subtle poison of guilt and fear. Her friends noticed the changes. At first, they chalked it up to her busy schedule, the overwhelming demands of her new job. But soon, they began to see a different Priya. The lively, confident woman who had first arrived in Dubai was now quieter. She seemed more anxious, her smile less genuine, as if it took everything she had to force it. They would invite her out for drinks, for a simple dinner, anything to get her to relax and let loose, but Priya always made excuses. "I'm so sorry, I'm just really tired." Or, "I have plans with Victor." The guilt hung in her chest, but she pushed it down. She was getting everything she had ever wanted, wasn't she? So what did it matter if her friends didn't understand? If they didn't know how things really were? But deep down, a small voice whispered that something wasn't right. The truth was, Victor was isolating her in ways that were hard to see, but impossible to ignore once you started paying attention. The first time she noticed it clearly was when she moved into the apartment he had bought for her. The apartment was magnificent, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city skyline. It was the kind of place Priya had only ever seen in movies, glass, steel, and luxury. It was a far cry from the cramped little apartment she'd been renting, barely big enough to move around in. But as she unpacked her things, placing clothes in drawers she'd never paid for, the weight of it all started to settle in. This apartment wasn't just a gift, it was a prison. Victor had promised it was to help her, to give her a better life, a life of comfort and security. But with each new piece of furniture, each new luxury that came with the apartment, Priya felt a knot tightening in her chest. She was living in the kind of place she had once only dreamed of, but she was paying for. It was something much more valuable than money. Her independence. She tried to rationalize it. She told herself that it wasn't a big deal. After all, she was getting everything she had wanted, wasn't she? The life she'd dreamed of, the one that had seemed so far out of reach, was now at her fingertips. She had everything she could want. So, what if Victor had made some demands along the way? But the truth was, Victor's gifts didn't come without strings. He would buy her clothes, beautiful, expensive pieces that made her feel like a different person. She would wear them to dinners at exclusive restaurants, to parties that were out of her league. She felt special, for the first time in her life, as if she belonged in a world that had always felt distant and untouchable. But those gifts came with an expectation. Every time Victor handed her something new, whether it was a designer dress, a piece of jewelry, or a trip to a lavish resort, he would remind her of what she owed him. "You know, Priya," he would say, his voice smooth, almost soothing. "I do all this for you because I believe in you. I believe in what you can become. But loyalty is everything in this world. You understand that, right?" She would nod, the weight of his words settling in her chest like a stone. Loyalty. It wasn't just a word anymore, it was a demand. And as the weeks passed, the gifts piled up, the trips to Paris, the weekends in the Maldives, the jewelry that made her feel like royalty. But with each gesture of generosity, Victor's grip tightened. The deeper Priya sank into Victor's world, the harder it became to breathe. What once seemed like a life of luxury, dinners in five-star restaurants, holidays in places she could only dream of, had transformed into something darker, more oppressive. Each day, Priya's independence, her sense of self, slipped further from her grasp as Victor's demands and control grew more pronounced. It wasn't just the secrecy anymore. It wasn't just the gifts. Victor's influence over her was no longer subtle. It was pervasive, suffocating. The first time Priya tried to reach out for help was on a quiet Sunday evening. She sat alone in her new apartment, surrounded by the lavish things that had come at the cost of her isolation. Her phone buzzed, an incoming message from a friend back home. The text was simple. "Hey Priya, how are you? Miss you. Let's catch up soon." For a moment, Priya's heart leapt. She longed to feel connected again, to hear the voices of those who truly cared about her. She quickly typed a reply. "I miss you too, but I'm really busy with work and everything. Things are going well here, though." As she read the message before sending it, a cold shiver ran down her spine. It was the first time she had ever lied so easily. In fact, it had become second nature. Priya realized, with a jolt, how much she had changed. Victor had trained her, in his own way, to isolate herself, to believe that the life she now led, the world she had entered, was the only world worth living in. Everything else, everyone else, was secondary. Her friends, her family, they couldn't understand what she was building here, what Victor had promised her. And soon, even the little things started to go wrong. At work, her colleagues began noticing that she was becoming more distant, quieter. Priya had always been outgoing, friendly with everyone. But now she avoided eye contact, kept to herself, and always had a vague excuse whenever someone asked her to hang out. "Sorry, I have plans with Victor," she would say, her voice hollow, the weight of those words settling on her like a heavy cloak. Victor's hold on her had grown so strong that she couldn't even look at her friends without feeling guilty. Guilty for being ungrateful. Guilty for being so deep in something that, deep down, she knew wasn't right. Victor, meanwhile, continued to reward her with more gifts, more attention. But it was all so carefully calculated. Nothing was ever truly free. It wasn't the gifts that made Priya feel indebted. It was the subtle way Victor began to manipulate her into believing that every act of kindness came with an unspoken price. When she moved into the apartment he had bought for her, Victor made it clear that she could never move backward. "You'll never want to leave this place, Priya," he told her, his voice as smooth as the fine whiskey he always drank. "This is where you belong. This is what you deserve." But in her heart, Priya knew something had changed. The initial excitement had worn off, replaced with an empty feeling every time she walked through the door. The apartment, once a symbol of success, now felt like a cage made of glass. It was beautiful, yes, but it was his cage, not hers. The strangest part? She couldn't seem to escape it. There was no way out. The rent was paid by him, the furniture was his choice. She realized she had no ownership here, not of the apartment, not of her life. Victor's power over her had become absolute. The luxury she had once desired had now become a reminder of her submission. Each new pair of shoes, each new dress, beautiful and elegant though they were, reminded her that nothing came without cost. Every gift had strings attached, and with each passing day the tension in Priya's chest grew. She started to feel like a puppet dancing on Victor's strings, with every move and every decision being made for her, by him. "I'm doing this for you, Priya," Victor would say. "You should be grateful. You should trust me. I'm giving you everything you've ever wanted." And Priya, exhausted and afraid, would nod. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate everything Victor had done for her. It was that she had no idea how to break free. Victor didn't allow her to leave either, not in any real sense. He demanded she stay close to him. He insisted she spend all her time with him. If she tried to visit her old friends, he would remind her of the consequences. If she expressed even the slightest hesitation or doubt, he would use guilt to manipulate her back into line. "You wouldn't want to lose all this, would you?" he would ask, the quiet threat hidden beneath his smooth words. And every time Priya would swallow her discomfort and comply. She didn't want to disappoint him. She didn't want to lose everything she had. Do you think Priya could have broken free from Victor's control? Or was she too far gone, too entangled in the web of manipulation? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to find out how this dangerous relationship continues to unfold. It was the first time in a long while that Priya allowed herself to feel something other than fear and guilt. The weight of it all, the isolation, the manipulation, had grown unbearable. The constant pressure from Victor, the demands of his presence, the suffocating control he had over every part of her life. It was finally starting to take its toll. She had been playing the role of the perfect, grateful girlfriend for so long, but the cracks were starting to show. Priya had once been strong. Once she had believed in her own independence, in the power of her dreams. But now those dreams felt like distant memories. She had begun to lose herself, piece by piece, in a life she had never wanted, entangled in a world that Victor had spun around her. One evening, sitting alone in the luxurious apartment that had become her prison, she made a decision. She couldn't take it anymore. She needed help. She needed someone to see what she couldn't see anymore. She reached out. She contacted an old friend from back home in India, a woman she had once trusted, someone who had known the real Priya, the girl who had walked away from her small town with hope in her heart. "I can't do this anymore," Priya said over the phone, her voice shaky. "Victor, he's controlling me. I don't know how to leave. I feel trapped." Her friend listened quietly for a moment before responding. "Priya, you need to wake up. This isn't the man you think he is. You're being manipulated, used. And the longer you stay, the more dangerous it becomes." Priya's heart pounded in her chest. She had always known something was wrong, but hearing the truth from someone else, it hit harder than she expected. "You don't understand," Priya whispered. "He's given me everything. I can't just walk away from that. I can't." But her friend's voice was firm. "You can't keep living like this. He's using you. And once he's done with you, Priya, he'll discard you like the others. You know it, deep down." The words hit her like a slap to the face. The others. What did that mean? For the first time, Priya felt a cold chill run down her spine. She had never questioned Victor's motives too deeply before. She had always believed the story he told her, that he was her protector, her benefactor, someone who wanted nothing more than to see her succeed. But now, those words, those promises seemed hollow. Her mind raced as her friend continued speaking. "He's done this before, Priya. He's a predator. He's been using women like you for years, taking what he wants and then throwing them away when they get too close. You're not the first." The revelation shook Priya to her core. Victor had painted a picture of himself as someone who could offer her a future, someone who had helped other women just like her. But hearing the truth about him, about the other women, shattered everything. She had heard rumors, sure, but the reality was far worse than she had ever imagined. As she sat there, the gravity of it all settled in. Priya was more than just a victim of circumstance. She was a pawn in Victor's game, one he had been playing for years. And he didn't care about her, he only cared about control. The realization hit her with a wave of dread. She felt nauseous, she wanted to run, She wanted to scream, but fear rooted her to the spot. Victor had become so much more than a partner. He had become the trap that kept her locked in his world. His hold on her was suffocating, and now, knowing what she knew, she could feel the full extent of his manipulation, his cold, calculating control over every part of her life. But there was no escape. Not yet. She wanted to leave. She wanted to run back home to her family, to the life she had left behind. But what if she was too deep? What if Victor's influence over her was too strong? What if... The door to the apartment creaked open. Victor was home. Priya froze. Her heart skipped a beat, panic rising like bile in her throat. She quickly wiped her tears away and tried to steady herself. The lie had become her shield, her way of surviving. She couldn't let him see what was happening inside her. She couldn't let him know she was questioning everything he had done. Victor stepped into the room, his presence filling the space with an unsettling power. He was dressed in his usual impeccable style, his expensive cologne filling the air like a heavy cloud. His eyes, cold, calculating, locked onto hers. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, his voice smooth but sharp. There was no anger in his tone, but the question hung heavy in the air, a silent threat. Priya swallowed, the words barely leaving her lips. "Just a friend," she said, hoping the lie would be enough to appease him. But Victor wasn't fooled. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A friend? You've been distant lately, Priya. What's going on? You're not keeping any secrets from me, are you?" The tension in the room thickened. Priya's mind raced, her thoughts scattered. She wanted to flee. She wanted to scream, but she knew she couldn't, not yet. Victor stepped closer, his gaze piercing. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his fingers digging into her, skin just hard enough to feel like a warning. "You know, Priya," he said, his voice soft, almost too soft. "You owe me everything, and I don't take kindly to betrayal." Priya flinched, her body stiffening under his touch. The fear in her chest intensified, squeezing the air from her lungs. "There's no way out," she thought. "I'm trapped." What do you think? Is Priya truly trapped, or does she still have a chance to escape? How do you think Victor will react to the truth coming out? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to follow the shocking twists of this story. The night Priya decided to fight back, the air felt different. Charged, heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. For weeks, she had been living in fear, her every move controlled, every word weighed by the dread of Victor's wrath. But tonight, something inside her snapped. She couldn't breathe in his suffocating grip anymore. She couldn't live in the gilded cage he had built around her. She had reached her breaking point. Priya had tried to escape in every way she knew how. Small rebellions, quiet moments of resistance, confiding in a friend who, with her warning, had only opened her eyes to the depths of Victor's manipulation. She had convinced herself that she was too far in to leave, that there was no turning back. But tonight, the desperation and the horror of her situation broke through. She would confront him. She would demand freedom. It was a decision that came from the deepest part of her soul. A moment of defiance, the last echo of the woman she used to be before Victor had broken her spirit. Victor had just returned from another one of his business trips, his arrogant confidence as usual, his smile slick with entitlement. But tonight it was different. Tonight, Priya didn't smile back. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling but firm, as she stood in the center of their luxurious apartment. The same apartment Victor had bought for her, the same apartment that now felt like a tomb. Victor, sensing something was different, leaned against the doorframe, his eyes narrowing. "What is it, Priya? You look tense." "I can't do this anymore," she said, each word taking everything she had left. "I'm done. I want out. I want to go back to my life. I want to go home." Her voice cracked, the weight of her decision heavy in the air between them. Victor's face darkened instantly. His usual charm evaporated, replaced with something colder, darker. Something Priya had seen flashes of before, but never like this. "You want to leave?" Victor's voice was deceptively calm, but Priya could feel the anger simmering beneath it. He pushed off from the doorframe and took a step toward her, his movements deliberate, predatory. Priya stepped back instinctively, her heart racing in her chest. She had never felt so small, so helpless. "Yes, I'm done. I'm leaving." Victor's eyes narrowed, his expression twisted into something sinister. "You think you can just walk away from me after everything I've done for you?" He laughed bitterly, a sound that sent chills down Priya's spine. "You owe me, Priya. You owe me everything," he hissed. His voice grew louder, more menacing, as he took another step closer. "You're nothing without me. You can't just walk away from all of this." Priya's breath hitched in her throat, fear clawing at her insides. But she stood her ground, even as her body screamed at her to run. "I can't keep living like this. I'm not your possession, Victor. I'm not your property." His eyes flashed with something darker, more dangerous. Without warning, he lunged at her. Priya staggered back, her heart pounding in her ears. She tried to push him away, but he was too strong, too powerful. "You don't get to leave," he spat, grabbing her arm with crushing force. The pain shot through her like fire. Her vision blurred with panic. "You think you can just walk away, after everything I've given you?" She cried out, struggling against his grip, her pulse racing as he pulled her closer. "Let me go, Victor, please." But it was no use. He was too angry, too far gone. The man who had once charmed her, who had promised her a better life, had now become a monster, unrecognizable in his rage. With one brutal shove, he threw her against the wall, the impact jarring her body. She gasped for breath, disoriented, her head spinning. But there was no time to recover. Victor was upon her again, his hands around her throat, his face twisted in a grimace of fury. The world seemed to tilt, the edges of her vision darkening. And in that moment Priya knew she was fighting for her life. She clawed at his hands, her fingers slipping, the strength draining from her body as Victor's grip tightened with every passing second. The violence was swift. There was no warning, no hesitation. Victor's rage was unleashed in a single, ferocious act. Priya's life, so full of promise just days before, was slipping away with every painful, desperate gasp for air. In that final, fleeting moment, as her consciousness faded, Priya thought of her family. Her mother's voice, the hopes and dreams she had left behind. She thought of the young woman who had come to Dubai with nothing but ambition, and now all of it was slipping away. The world grew colder, darker, and then there was nothing. What followed was a scene of unspeakable cruelty. Victor left her there, her body lying lifeless on the cold marble floor of the apartment that had once symbolized her dreams. The apartment, the life she had wanted, was now stained with the marks of her final moments. Priya had been robbed of everything: her future, her hope, and her chance at freedom. And Victor? He walked away as if she had never mattered. The woman who had once dreamed of a better life, who had longed for freedom, for a life beyond the borders of her small town, was now gone, her life extinguished in the same place she had hoped to find salvation. Her bright future, her dreams of a different life, had been cut short in an act of violence so brutal it left the authorities speechless. Priya, the girl who had only wanted more than the life she was born into, had become just another casualty of the dangerous web of manipulation and control she had been drawn into. What do you think? Was there any way Priya could have escaped before it was too late? And how do you feel about the man who took everything from her? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more of this shocking story as we uncover the aftermath of her tragic fate. It didn't take long for the truth to begin unraveling. But even as the investigation gained momentum, the web Victor had spun was vast, and the shadow of his influence seemed to stretch endlessly over the city. The discovery of Priya's body sent shockwaves through the community. A young woman, full of promise, murdered in cold blood. But what began as a simple case of domestic violence quickly turned into something far more complex as detectives began to piece together the chilling truth. The first clue came when investigators traced the financial transactions linked to Victor Al-Fayed. At first glance, they appeared to be nothing more than generous gifts and lavish spending. But as they dug deeper, something didn't add up. Large sums of money had been transferred to Priya's account from unknown sources, often linked to shadowy offshore accounts, far beyond the reach of ordinary people. The money wasn't just a gift. It was part of a pattern of manipulation, of control. The investigation revealed that Victor had been using his wealth and status to cover his tracks. He had presented himself as a successful businessman, a self-made millionaire, but the truth was far more sinister. His financial empire, built on a facade of legitimacy, was nothing more than a house of cards, hiding his criminal activities. As detectives delved deeper into Victor's background, they uncovered a disturbing series of text messages between Priya and her family. The messages were filled with love and hope, but there was an underlying tension. Priya had tried to tell them in subtle ways that things weren't as they seemed. She had tried to ask for help, but the manipulation was too strong. She had been trapped, and in her final messages, she had begged for an escape that would never come. Her family didn't know it at the time, but they had been the last to hear from her. The weight of those messages, the final cries of a woman on the brink of freedom, made the truth all the more heartbreaking. But it was the forensic evidence that would ultimately bring Victor's lies to light. The investigators sent the crime scene evidence to the lab, and the results came back damning. DNA traces found on Priya's body matched Victor's, leaving no doubt about his involvement. But the forensic team didn't stop there. They reviewed the security footage from the building. Hidden cameras had captured Victor entering the apartment the night of the murder, his movements cold and calculated. The footage showed him walking into the building with a confident stride, unaware that the cameras were recording his every step. He left hours later, looking no different than when he arrived, as if he had just returned from a normal evening out. The footage was clear. Victor had been the last person seen with Priya, and the timeline lined up perfectly with the time of her death. But the evidence didn't end there. Interviews with Priya's friends and co-workers painted a disturbing picture of Victor's true nature. Her friends, who had once admired her new life in Dubai, began to speak out. They shared their concerns, how Priya had changed, how she had become more distant, more anxious, as if something was weighing on her soul. One co-worker, a woman who had worked closely with Priya at the hotel, remembered a conversation they had weeks before her death. Priya had mentioned a man who was helping her, but she had always kept him at arm's length, refusing to introduce him to her friends. "He's different," Priya had said, with a hesitant smile. "He wants to protect me, but I don't know if I can trust him yet." That was the last anyone heard of Victor before Priya's tragic end. And in hindsight, those words were a chilling foreshadowing of what was to come. As the evidence piled up, the full scope of Victor's manipulation became clear. He had been using the same tactics on multiple women, each one falling prey to his charm, his promises, and ultimately his cruelty. He would isolate them, manipulate their dreams and desires, and then, when they became too close, he would discard them. Priya wasn't the first, but she would be the last. Victor's wealth and influence had made it difficult for the police to get a full picture of his past. He had used his power to silence witnesses, to create a perfect illusion of success. But as the investigation dug deeper, more victims came forward, each one telling a similar story. Stories of manipulation, control, and fear. Experts in the field of forensic psychology began to piece together the pattern. Victor was a textbook example of a predator, charming, successful, and ruthless. Psychologists explained how he had preyed on Priya's vulnerability, how he had manipulated her hopes for a better life and turned them into chains. Victor wasn't just a man who liked control, one forensic psychologist said in an interview. He thrived on it. His manipulation was a carefully constructed strategy, designed to isolate his victims and make them believe they were nothing without him. It's a classic case of emotional abuse that eventually escalates into physical violence. As the investigation unfolded, Victor's true nature was exposed for all to see. The wealthy, powerful businessman was nothing more than a predator, someone who used his position to prey on vulnerable women, someone who would stop at nothing to maintain control. Victor was arrested and charged with Priya's murder, along with the crimes he had committed over the years. But even as the legal system moved forward with its case, the scars of his actions lingered. The women he had destroyed, the lives he had ruined, they were still left to pick up the pieces. How do you feel about the shocking truth behind Victor's actions? Were there any signs you think Priya could have picked up on sooner? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to follow the unfolding of this heartbreaking story as we uncover the aftermath of Victor's manipulation. Priya's tragic death was not an isolated incident. It was a warning, a stark reminder of the hidden dangers that lurk beneath the glimmering surface of wealth and power. As the investigation into Victor Al-Fayed unfolded, it quickly became clear that Priya was not the first victim of his manipulation. In fact, she was part of a much darker, more widespread pattern, one that spanned not just the luxury high-rises of Dubai, but also the hidden corners of the globe. Priya's story struck a nerve, not only in Dubai but internationally. It opened a door to a conversation that had been too long ignored: the systemic exploitation of vulnerable women in relationships built on power, wealth, and control. It wasn't just about one man's cruelty. It was about a culture that often turned a blind eye to the abuse of power, especially in cities where money and status could silence those who were hurt the most. Dubai, with its glittering skyline and luxurious lifestyle, was a place where wealth was king. But beneath the wealth, behind the golden facades of five-star hotels and exclusive clubs, there existed a darker reality, one where money, influence, and status were often used as tools to manipulate and control. In a place where appearances mattered above all else, there was little room for the stories of those who were being exploited, especially when the perpetrators were men like Victor Al-Fayed. As more women came forward, it became clear that Victor's actions were not unique. He was part of a much larger network, a network of wealthy men who used their status to control young women in similar sugar daddy relationships. These men preyed on the vulnerabilities of women who were seeking a way out of poverty, offering them the illusion of a better life, only to trap them in cycles of manipulation, control, and, in some cases, worse. One of the most shocking revelations came when investigators uncovered that some of the women in Victor's web were being coerced into human trafficking. The same women who thought they had found a way to escape their struggles were being manipulated into a life far worse than anything they had feared. They were being forced into relationships with men who had the power to control them, to sell them, to use them however they saw fit. Some of these women had been promised high-paying jobs, glamorous lifestyles, and financial independence, only to find themselves trapped in a world where their bodies were no longer their own. The cases revealed a chilling connection between the sugar daddy relationships and human trafficking rings that operated within the city's elite circles. Women who had been exploited for their beauty, their youth, their vulnerability, were suddenly forced into a system of trafficking that was both horrifying and profitable. But the public outcry, triggered by Priya's case, began to force the issue into the open. Activists, human rights groups, and concerned citizens began to demand change, to shine a light on the exploitation that was taking place right under the noses of those who held power. And while the story of Priya Mehra is heartbreaking, it is not the only one. As the case progressed, experts began to weigh in on the broader implications of what had happened. Victor Al-Fayed is a textbook example of a predator who used his wealth and power to manipulate and exploit vulnerable women, said Dr. Emily Rodriguez, a renowned forensic psychologist who specializes in abusive power dynamics. What we see here is a classic case of coercive control. He didn't just offer these women a way out of poverty. He used their desperation, their dreams, against them. He made them feel like they owed him, like they couldn't survive without him. And once he had them, he never let them go. Dr. Rodriguez went on to explain how power imbalances, especially in relationships where one partner has significant wealth and influence, often enable these dynamics to take root. It's all about control. Wealthy men like Victor understand that they can use their status to silence their victims. And when you're in a place like Dubai, where wealth and influence are worshipped, it's easy for these men to escape accountability. The situation in Dubai is not unique. Global statistics. According to the United Nations, human trafficking continues to be one of the largest criminal industries in the world, with women and children being the most vulnerable victims. In many cases, women who fall into abusive relationships with wealthy men are eventually coerced or tricked into trafficking, forced into sex work, or sold into exploitative labor situations. Human trafficking doesn't always look like what we imagine, explained Professor Michael Harris, a human rights law expert. It's not always about being physically taken across borders. In some cases, like this one, trafficking can be psychological. These women are manipulated, often through promises of love or financial support. And once they're dependent, they're trapped. They might not even realize they're being trafficked until it's too late. Experts estimate that globally there are millions of women who are being exploited in similar situations. Women who are controlled through manipulation, financial dependence, and coercion. And while the rich and powerful continue to escape scrutiny, the victims are often left with little to no recourse. Priya's death has sparked an international outcry, drawing attention to the exploitative dynamics that thrive in cities like Dubai, where wealth can shield the guilty from justice. Activists are calling for stronger laws, better enforcement, and greater accountability for those who use their power and influence to manipulate and abuse vulnerable individuals. But the conversation doesn't stop with Victor Al-Fayed. The case of Priya Mehra has become a symbol for all the women who have been lured into these toxic relationships, for all those who have been controlled and manipulated by men like Victor. Her story serves as a stark reminder of how power and money can corrupt relationships, turning them into systems of control where the most vulnerable are left with nothing but broken promises and shattered lives. What are your thoughts on the broader issues revealed by Priya's story? How can we address the hidden dynamics of manipulation and exploitation that take place in cities like Dubai? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more on this critical issue and the aftermath of Priya's tragic fate. Priya Mehra was more than just a victim of a brutal crime. She was a young woman with dreams, dreams of a better life, dreams of independence, of lifting her family out of poverty, and of finding a place where she could truly be free. She arrived in Dubai full of hope, eager to step into the world she had always dreamed of. She was a fighter, determined to make her mark, to escape the constraints of her small town, and to create a life that was hers alone. But that life was stolen from her. In the end, Priya's story became one of tragedy, of manipulation, and of a life cut short by the very dreams she had fought so hard for. She was a woman whose ambition was used against her, whose desire for freedom was twisted into a tool of control. She didn't deserve what happened to her. No one does. Yet, in her short life, Priya showed resilience. Even in her darkest moments, when she knew she was trapped, she fought. She reached out for help. She tried to break free. In those final days, her courage shone through the suffocating fear, reminding us that she was more than just the sum of her struggles. Priya's dreams will never be realized. The future she could have had, a future of possibilities, of hope, of love, was ripped away from her in a moment of violence. And we are left to mourn not just the woman she was, but the woman she could have become. Her death was senseless, cruel, and avoidable. But Priya's story is not just hers. It is the story of countless others, victims of toxic relationships, of manipulation, of abuse disguised as love. It is a story that we must not ignore, a story that demands we take a hard look at the systems that allow such abuse to happen. The time for silence has passed. We must rise to the call for awareness, for support, and for justice. There are so many like Priya, women who find themselves trapped in relationships where love is conditional, where power is used to control, and where their dreams become nothing more than chains. It is time to speak out, to offer support to those who feel they have nowhere to turn, to provide resources for women who need help in escaping their abusers. We must create environments where victims can seek help without fear of retribution, where they can rebuild their lives without the shadow of manipulation looming over them. As we reflect on Priya's life and her tragic death, we are forced to confront the harsh reality of the toxic relationships that can exist in the shadows. It's easy to see relationships like hers as isolated incidents, something that happens to other people. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. Priya was not alone in her suffering, and there are countless others who are still stuck in the same situation, their voices silenced, their lives controlled. This story serves as a sobering reminder of the cost of ambition when it is manipulated by those in power. The price of secrecy, of using others as pawns in a game where the stakes are lives, not just money. Victor Al-Fayed's actions were fueled by entitlement, by a belief that he could control the lives of those beneath him. And for far too long, the system allowed him to get away with it. But Priya's story is also a call to action, a reminder that we must challenge these power dynamics, that we must demand change. It is a call to stand up for those who cannot speak for themselves, to offer help to those who are lost, and to never turn a blind eye to abuse. We can't bring Priya back, but we can honor her memory by making sure her story is heard, by supporting the victims of abuse, and by working to ensure that no one else has to suffer the way she did. Priya's story is heartbreaking, but it's also a call for action. If you or someone you know is trapped in a toxic or abusive relationship, it's never too late to seek help. Share this video, raise awareness, and let's work together to create a safer world for everyone. Leave your thoughts below and subscribe to follow the ongoing conversation around this important issue.